Hey, how you doing? Bob Volks here from the Gilly-Galoo. Out in the beautiful outdoors again today. Had a bit of snow yesterday. Turned crazy mild overnight for some reason or other. Had to rain a little bit. But anyway, that's the way it goes, as they say. Filled the feeders. You can see them around me here. We just got them filled up. We're starting to get ready for the arrival of our winter birds. So pine siskins, common redpolls, a whole bunch of different things like that. But some degree, some pine grosbeaks, depending where you are, those types of things. But certainly a lot of the more common are the pine siskins and the common redpolls. And so I want to talk about a little bit about identification and, certainly having your feeders full of Niger and that kind of stuff for them, depending on how things go and the numbers. Last year we had hundreds and hundreds of pine siskins. We still have a very large flock here of American goldfinch. We have 30, 40 here every morning probably, some days 50, 60, that kind of stuff. So it's always great to keep things topped up. But one of the things we talk about a lot about in identification in particular when we get talking about birds in general for that matter, but I find don't be afraid to be wrong. We gotta take a stab at what we think it is and go with it and then go from there. But the other thing I find sometimes, myself included, is that we see a bird and immediately we're going to go for the ID. So whether we jump to our app on our phone or we jump into our books or that kind of stuff. But I wonder, one of the things we wanted to do was just kind of take a second and start thinking about it. So when we see a bird, let's start to zero in on some key identification points. So does it have any wing bars? What's the shape of the beak? What's the breast like? What about the tail? Does it have a forked tail? Get into some of those kinds of things. What about an eye ring? What about an eye patch or any of those kinds of things? So once we start to learn to, when we see something, focus in on some of the key characteristics of that particular bird, then we can do a bunch of stuff. One, we learn to go, wham, what's that? This type of species. It's the finch family. It's whatever, those kinds of things. We can automatically start to go there and start to narrow it down as to what we think it might be. So there's a bunch of different things like that. So take your time. Take a look at the bird and start to look at it. So with the oncoming winter birds that we're going to have, so like the redpolls, for instance, some discussion about that, but there believes about 4 different species of redpolls. We see basically the 3 species here, kind of thing. There's one out of Greenland and way further north that we often don't see in this part of the world, but we certainly see those 4. So it takes some time to kind of start looking at them. They all kind of look the same. I mean, if you get into finches and sparrows and those kind of things, and you start working on the warbler family, which a lot of them are associated that way, it starts to broaden what you're looking at. So, but zero in on some of those key features: the beak, the breast. What's the breast look like? What's the tail feathers look like? Is there an eye ring? Is there an eye patch or a patch across the top of their head? Think about a white crowned sparrow, as for instance. So those kinds of things will give you a good visual of what that's like. But a couple of the other things so one of the things I like to do, and I have it here, is I'm always marking the heck out of a book. I take the book, I take it apart, I looked at all different aspects of it, and then I mark it. So if there's key things, if there's key indicators that trigger my ability to be able to identify something or remember something about a particular type of species of bird, I always mark it up so that I can get right to it. And I put little titles on the pages so that I can kind of go back to it quickly and say, oh yeah, that was the key, that was the point about that. So quickly, I want to look at some different things here. So inside, this is a fantastic book we have at the store. It's a Canadian guy, Chris Early. He from the University of Guelph. It's a fantastic book. He has a whole series of books: sparrows and finches, owls and hawks, warblers. He has a great series of books, and we have them all at the stores, of course. But there's one to look quickly here. So see how he has all these identifiers in here. So you look at the white crowned sparrow there to see that, see the eye patch. And then below, see the eye ring. See on the breast, see in the tail, see in the leg, the underside, the rump. What's the tail like? All those kinds of things. So we jump right into that kind of stuff. And when we start talking about different species and stuff, for instance, we get into the junco. You know, so I write down stuff all about the junco, and there's often vagrants that come into the area that are species of juncos, but they're not normal here. So it talks about the vagrants that come in, and they have different classifications for things. You know, so some of our other winter birds, purple finches, house finches, those kinds of things are going to start to show up, and the characteristics for the male and the female, how they look, and how they look differently, and all that kind of stuff. So mark up your book. You know, don't be afraid to write things down. But here we get into the redpoll. I love these little guys. So this is a common redpoll here. I love these little guys, and we can all say that it's a cone-shaped beak. You know, it's cone-shaped. The male-female differences and how that is. What's common species? That's another great thing. If you can start learning some common species, so that you know, well, a tree sparrow and a song sparrow kind of, you know, they kind of look the same or something like that. That'll start triggering some things. But one of the really great things I wanted to talk about that Chris does here in his book, and that I like to do, is cheat sheets. And what do you mean by cheat sheets? So let's go into something here that we can talk about. So on a house finch, for instance, on his cheat sheet, so he has checklist of the different birds that he has seen, and then a house finch. Some of the cheat might be on a female is that it has a pale face and it's dull brown. So he start classifying the birds that you've seen. Write it down, even on a piece of paper, on a pad or whatever. Write it down and say, you know, well, out of this bird, the tree sparrow I saw, or the song sparrow I saw, you know, you write down key features of that particular bird, and then it will go a long way to helping you increase your memory, but also the features and the factors that help you identify those specific birds. So anyway, just out in the backyard today, we got the feeders full. The winter birds are coming, so fill your feeders. Some of the sightings are starting to trickle in from people up in the Boreal Forest area, Whitney, those kinds of areas. Been talking to some people. So the siskins and the common redpolls and those kinds of guys are on the way. So get those feeders full and have some fun.